Vincent van Gogh summarized an artist's inspiration by saying, "You must start by experiencing what you want to express." But while many artists base their art on experience, they also embellish, change, or distort their experience for purposes of their craft. Welcome to another episode of Channel 914. I'm your host, Rael Allen. And I wish I could take credit for those words, but those are actually from an opinion written by Judge Joshua D. Wolson, a United States District Judge of the District Court of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. It's a lot of time to say district in the sentence. In the case of Bay Cousin versus Powell. In this case, Ernest Powell and Philip Cherry stopped Mudaheen, I know I'm probably butchered that name, Mudaheen Bay Cousin, in response to a backup call to apprehend a suspect who did not fit Bay's description at all. That stop led to an arrest and conviction in federal court for being a felon in possession of a firearm. Mr. Bay Cousin remained incarcerated from March 28, 2016 until December of 2018. When the Third Circuit Court vacated the conviction, Mr. Bay Cousin alleged that officers Powell and Cherry actually planted a firearm on him during the arrest. Bay Cousin filed a suit against the officers for damages to his rap career and amongst other things. And the officers' attorneys sought to use his lyrics as evidence of his alleged guilt. The judge in this case, they wrote that opinion, did not allow his lyrics to be used as evidence. So Jeffrey Lamar Williams, also known as Young Thug, I'm sure y'all probably heard about this already, was hit with an indictment back in May of 2022, alleging that he co-founded a violent street gang that committed multiple murders, shootings, and carjackings over roughly a decade and promoted its activities in songs and on social media. Fulton County prosecutors say that in late 2012, he and two others founded Young Slime Life, a violent criminal street gang that's commonly known as YSL and is affiliated with the National Bloods gang. Thug's case has become the latest and arguably the highest profile example of rap lyrics being used as evidence in court. While many see the rapper's lyrics as admissions of guilt, others argue that this case, and others like it, are a direct attack on freedom of expression and just another tactic that the criminal justice system is using to funnel young black males into prison. Then given that other art forms are really used in the court that rap lyrics are, I'm inclined to agree. In a piece by the New York Times from last year, reporter Jai Lee found that only 4 instances between 1950 and 2022 where other art forms, either lyrics or other fictional writing, were brought up in trial as evidence, and none of them resulted in a lasting conviction. Recently, Killer Mike tweeted about, and the rapper Killer Mike, not an actual killer, in case you have to make that distinction, tweeted about the case of Nancy Crampton Brophy, who shot and killed her husband, Daniel Brophy, on June 2nd of 2018. She was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in September of 2018 and was found guilty in May of 2022 after a 7-week trial. 7 years before her arrest, Crampton Brophy wrote an essay titled "How to Murder Your Husband." That's like some weird, bizarro, reverse O.J. Simpson shit. But she wrote that for the website C. Jane Publish. The judge presiding over the case excluded the essay as evidence from her trial, though. Atlanta area district attorney Fannie Willis, who's now become famous, whose office issued the RICO indictment against Young Thug and other alleged members of YSL, staunchly defends her use of lyrics to prosecute her cases, recently telling reporters that she is a believer in the First Amendment, but nothing in the amendment precludes prosecutors from using lyrics as evidence. And unfortunately, she's actually right. People are trying to change that, though, and we'll get to that later. While Miss Willis may be the latest to use rap lyrics as evidence against artists, she's far from the first. Lyrics being used against rappers in court dates back all the way to 2 Live Crew in 1990. Y'all remember them 2 Live Crew videos on the box? I know I do. Brought me to a manhood. The rap group was arrested and charged for violating the obscenity law, a law banning or suppressing speech that violates standards of good taste and decency, which can sound kind of arbitrary and open to interpretation, in my opinion. for performing their raunchy music at a record store prior to the release of their album, As Nasty as They Want to Be. Definitely remember that album. In the trial, their lyrics were used to rationalize their behavior as punishable. But in the end, Uncle Luke, Brother Marquis, and the late Fresh Kid Ice were found not guilty. A few years later, Snoop and his bodyguard McKinley Malik Lee were charged with murder, voluntary manslaughter, and conspiracy to commit assault with a firearm and more following the murder of Philip Walder Merriam in 1993. Though none of his lyrics were used in the actual trial, Snoop's Murder Was the Case, a song written by Snoop about being convicted of murder, was played during closing arguments. Of all the people who I remember whose lyrics were used against him in the case, the one that sticks out to most to me is Mac Phipps. Mac was an artist on Master P's No Limit Records. Back then, I thought he was by far the best lyricist on No Limit. I mean, he could actually rap his ass off. Unfortunately, Phipps was charged with second-degree murder after a fatal shooting of 19-year-old Baron Victor Jr. that took place in his nightclub performance in Sedale, Louisiana in the year 2000. Most of the evidence was kind of circumstantial and based on eyewitness testimony that actually ended up changing. A lot of people recanted their statements after the trial. Prosecutors used Phipps' lyrics, including a phrase from his song released in 1998, Murder, Murder, Kill, Kill, and cited his nickname, the Camouflage Assassin, to establish his character to an all-white jury. Phipps spent 21 years in prison and was released on parole in 2021 after Governor John Bel Edwards granted him clemency. Phipps maintains his innocence to this day. In 2012, Lil Boosie Badass faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly putting out a hit on 35-year-old Terry Boyd. Prosecutors referenced lyrics from several of Boosie's songs at trial, one of them being 187, and claimed it was recorded the night Boyd was murdered in 2009. Boosie was ultimately found not guilty. He was facing life. A 2014 decision in response to the trial of an alleged drug dealer and aspiring rapper, Vontae Skinner, found violent and profane rap lyrics were read to the jury by state's witnesses, and the court ultimately ruled that swayed the opinions of jurors despite not having a material connection to the crime he was accused of, meaning that the lyrics that they were reciting actually had nothing to do with what actually happened. Skinner was charged with trying to kill alleged drug dealer Lamont Peterson in 2008. There were a few lines like, to your helmet, 4 slugs drilling in your cheek, to blow your face off and leave your brain caved in the street, are provocative and a little disturbing, but they were reportedly written well before the crime in question took place. The New Jersey Supreme Court overturned the attempted murder conviction as a result. In 2020, prosecutors in Maryland cited lyrics performed by hip-hop artist Lawrence Montague over the phone while being held in jail. Now, this is actually kind of stupid. The case involves the January 2017 killing of George Forrester, who was shot by a drug dealer after he attempted to buy cocaine with a counterfeit bill. Based on a single witness's identification, Lawrence Montague was indicted for Forrester's murder. 3 weeks before trial, Montague used a jailhouse telephone to record a rap verse, which was then uploaded to Instagram. At Montague's trial, the state of Maryland introduced the telephone recording of the lyrics as evidence of Montague's guilt, and Montague was convicted and sentenced to a combined 50 years for second-degree murder and use of a firearm in a crime of violence. After Montague appealed, the judge acknowledged that rap lyric evidence often has prejudicial effect and as improper propensity evidence of a defendant's bad character. But he also said that some of his writing bore such a striking resemblance to the crime in question that they served as direct proof of the defendant's involvement. Now, this probably is an example of when keeping it real goes wrong. I mean, if you're awaiting trial for murder, you might not want to record murderous lyrics over the phone from jail. I mean, I can't imagine how that would help your case. I don't think his lawyer approved that. I'm pretty sure he didn't run that by dude because he probably would have told him like, nah, don't do that. But this isn't just happening in America. In the UK, rapper Digga D was convicted of conspiracy to commit violent disorder and sentenced in 28 to 1 year in jail in 2018. Not only were his videos played in court as evidence, but as a result of a court order, he was required to submit lyrics to the police and notify them anytime he was releasing music after he spent time in jail. There is potential for legal ramifications if they object to his words, meaning if he basically writes some shit they don't like, they can put his ass back in jail, which that's pretty crazy. So there is legislation being proposed to disallow rap lyrics from being used as evidence. In New York, there is the Rap Music on Trial bill, named after a book written by Andrea L. Dennis and Eric Nielsen, that would limit the admissibility of evidence of a defendant's creative or artistic expression against such defendant in a criminal proceeding. In California, lawmakers passed a similar bill last year requiring courts to consider specified factors when balancing the probative value of that evidence against the substantial danger of undue prejudice. At the federal level, Representatives Hank Johnson of Georgia and Jamal Bowman of New York introduced the Restoring Artistic Protection Act in the U.S. House in July of 2022, which would limit the admissibility of evidence of an artist's creative or artistic expression against that artist in court. And I really hope those pass because I think it's a really slippery slope. It's one thing if you're actually corroborating like real crimes in your songs, that's just stupid. But there is something to be said about freedom of expression and artistic expression, right? Because it seems like these things are only being used against rappers. There are no other forms of music or artistic expression being prosecuted or used as evidence in this way. Freddie Mercury once saying that he just killed a man. Johnny Cash once saying that he shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. In neither case were their lyrics ever taken as something that they actually did. They were just viewed as storytellers. I believe that hip-hop artists deserve to be viewed the same way. But unfortunately, it's not that simple. With all the death and the violence that's become all too common in hip-hop, not just in the lyrics, but in real life, I think it's time that us as a community have a real conversation about the art. Hip-hop was born in the South Bronx in the 70s amidst poverty and violence. The two have remained fixtures in the culture and in many ways served as its catalyst. Quite ironic for something that has grown from what many considered to be a fad at that time to what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. I was raised on hip-hop, man. It shaped and molded me. I learned knowledge of self because of this music. Listening to Wu-Tang, Tribe Called Quest, UGK, Outkast, and others broadened my horizons and my understanding of culture. It exposed me to things that I didn't necessarily see or hear growing up on the south side of Chicago. But the violence that I heard in the music was definitely something that I was extremely familiar with. I accepted it as storytelling. Rap was an art form that prided itself in authenticity, and I felt that these were stories that needed to be told and heard. America would choose to ignore us in our struggles. We were largely invisible to the majority. Hip-hop would not allow them to ignore us any longer. They had to listen. I didn't really look at it as glorification of violence. I mean, yes, there were tales of murder and drug dealing, but there were also cautionary tales of what living a life of crime could do to you. The loss of loved ones, going to jail, or even the loss of your own life. For many, hip-hop seemed like the only way out of this struggle. And if they could get rich by telling their story and the stories of others around them, then maybe all that struggle and strife actually would mean something. After all, there weren't always a lot of options for young black kids growing up in poverty. Jay-Z once said, all us blacks got is sports and entertainment. He managed to use hip-hop to pull himself out of the projects and turn into a billionaire, despite admitting to dealing a large amount of drugs before becoming a world-famous rapper. But here we are in the year 2023. Hip-hop is turning 50 years old this year. And despite all of the billions of dollars that has been generated during that time, poverty and violence are still central themes in our culture. I think we're at the point where we really have to ask ourselves, is the content we're producing in our own detriment? Is the music perpetuating the cycle of violence? Is life actually imitating art? I can't definitively answer any of those questions, but I know I've seen the music have a direct impact on the violence in my city. Drill rap, which the world has come to know and love, was born right here in Chicago out of poverty and violence. It's so popular now that we've seen New York create its own version of it, and there's even a drill R&B now. Recently, I just saw that, which is kind of wild to me. Sadly, though, many of the pioneers of that art are not around to see what it has become, as they were victims of the violence chronicled in their lyrics. You know, it's pretty common knowledge now that the government intentionally flooded black communities with drugs. I mean, there's even a fucking show about it. Snowfall is actually a loose adaptation of the life of Rick Ross. And nah, I'm not talking about the king of Wingstop. I'm talking about the real freeway Rick Ross that made millions of dollars in the 80s working with the CIA, bringing cocaine into the country. I mean, they estimated in those years, man, he probably brought in about $900 million, which would be equal to about like $2 billion today. It's pretty substantial, man. Large amounts of cocaine that was helped with him by the government bringing into this country, coming from the West Coast, going all the way as far east as Pennsylvania. So you would think that knowing that the United States government intentionally put crack into our neighborhoods would change the way we deal with it. But it actually hasn't. And drug dealer rap is damn near just as profitable as dealing actual crack. And despite the alarming number of rappers being killed, violence is still a prominent theme in the music. So what does this all mean? Are we our own worst enemy? Is the art form that has come so far and done so much for artists actually helping to stifle us? Once again, I have no definitive answers here. And while I'm strongly against using lyrics as evidence against artists, I do think it's time for us to take a really hard look at the content we produce. Our very futures may depend on it, man. Might be time for a change. To head in a different direction. I wish I knew exactly what direction we need to head in or what the answers are, but I don't. I understand the struggle. I understand that so many people feel like they don't really have a choice. And when presented with limited options, getting fast money, something that could seem very attractive, and, you know, everybody think they're not going to be the ones to go to jail. They're not going to be the ones that end up dead. But nobody ever really gets out of it unscathed. Even the people that do make it to become world famous artists, man. A lot of those people got to deal with a lot of trauma, a lot of baggage, a lot of things that they wish they hadn't seen, wish they hadn't done. So with all the prosperity and all this money that's being made, maybe it's time to put that to good use. Maybe it's time to stop glorifying things that actually hold us back. But at that same time, people are still poor. People are still struggling. And those people deserve to be able to tell their stories without fear of prosecution. It's not a simple thing. It's not a simple problem. There are no simple solutions, man. It's not black and white. It's a lot of gray areas here. But I do feel like we need to evaluate what we're doing. It's time to make a change, man. I want to thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for tuning in. Once again, there's so much content out there, so many things being produced. I'm always thankful for anybody that chooses to view mine. So continue to do it. Like, subscribe, share, all that jazz. Until next time, peace.